Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'd like to thank you all on behalf of the Jewish Law Students Association, Israel on Campus, and Student Legal Society. And I'd like to thank Amos Guiora for coming to speak with us. Professor Amos Guiora is Professor of Law at the S.J. Quinney College of Law at the University of Utah. He teaches criminal procedure, international law, global perspectives on counterterrorism, and religion and terrorism, and incorporates innovative scenario-based instructions to address national and international security issues and dilemmas. He's a member of the American Bar Association's Law and National Security Advisory Committee, a research associate at the University of Oxford, Oxford Institute for Ethics, Law, and Armed Conflict, a research fellow at the International Institute for Counter-terrorism at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzylia, a corresponding member at the Netherlands School of Human Rights Research, the University of Utrecht School of Law, and was awarded the Senior Specialist Fulbright Fellowship for the Netherlands in 2008. Professor Guiora has published extensively in both the U.S. and Europe on issues related to national security, limits of interrogation, religion and terrorism, the limits of power, and multiculturalism and human rights. He is the author of Global Perspectives on Counterterrorism, Fundamentals of Counterterrorism, Constitutional Limits on Coercive Interrogation, Homeland Security, What is it and where is it going, and Freedom from Religion, Rights and National Security. Professor Guiora served for 19 years in the Israel Defense Forces as a lieutenant colonel and held a number of senior command positions, including the commander of the IDF School of Military Law and legal advisor to the Gaza Strip. Professor Guiora was awarded the S.J. Quinney College of Law Faculty Scholarship Award in 2011. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Guiora.
Good evening. Can you all hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Just so I have a sense of who, what, why, where, when you are, how many of you are college students? How many of you are not college students? How many of you are law students? Those of you, let's do it back. Those of you who are law students, how many of you take international law? Okay. Those of you who are college students, how many of you are fantasizing about law school? How many of you have nightmares about law school? How many of you who are in law school have nightmares about law school? So, I suggest, given the unfortunate timing and relevance of this evening, obviously, that we cover a number of different issues. And the way I suggest doing it is I will put some ideas out there, and then we'll have some questions. Does that work? Say yes? Yes. So, playing off of the introduction, I indeed served for 3 years as the legal advisor to the Gaza Strip from 1994 to 1997. And in the context of having served as the legal advisor to the Gaza Strip, for better or for worse, pick your poison, I have pretty significant experience with operational counterterrorism. I have experience with targeted killing, and I also have pretty significant experience in negotiating implementation of the Oslo peace process, because from 5 years, 94 to 99, I was tasked and mandated by the government of Israel to be responsible for the implementation of Oslo in Gaza. So if I think about the events of the past 8 days, and I try to tie it into this extraordinary complexity of international law, international politics, international relations, morality, and armed conflict, it's obvious that to use the word complex is almost trite because it is beyond complex. On a personal note, because stories are important, and because I know we're all fast friends, I also need to add that I commute between Salt Lake City, where I teach in the University of Utah, and Israel, because my wife and kids live outside Jerusalem, and with that I want to return. So unfortunately, it has been underreported, which is a polite term for non-reported, by the American media, and I hope the Canadian media is better than the American media. But the world changed last Friday. And I suggest that the world will never be the same again. And how did the world change last Friday? The world changed last Friday when Hamas deliberately targeted the city, which obviously is Jerusalem, which has been considered off limits by Hamas and by Iraq, go back to the Gulf War. And it had been totally off limits in the context of being shelled since 1967-68. And last Friday, Hamas deliberately fired into Jerusalem. that, I suggest to all of us, is a game changer, a paradigm shift that has been unreported, and I want to explain to you why it's so important. It sounds trite and rude. I assume many of you have been to Israel, say yes, yes. If you haven't been, you have family who have lived in Israel, say yes. So, you'll appreciate, I think, and if you don't, I apologize, the cynicism of somebody who has been around the block more than once. So I get terrorism. I get terrorists because I've spent thousands of hours with Herzylia terrorists. So the motivation, I get it. I mean this very seriously and very respectfully. I understand terrorist motivation because, as I say, I spent much too much time with terrorists. By the way, I spent time with Palestinian terrorists. I spent time with Jewish terrorists, so I understand the terrorist thing. I understand from their worldview this great desire, I mean this seriously, not cynically, this great desire to kill Israelis. I get that. It shouldn't surprise any of us. So I say yes, yes. But here's what happened on Friday. That for the first time ever, by targeting Jerusalem deliberately, they endangered Palestinians, they endangered Christians, they endangered Christian holy sites, and they endangered Muslim holy sites. And I can't imagine what would have happened if that stupid missile that was fired to Jerusalem would have gone into the Dome of the Rock. Think about that for a second. And I can't imagine what would have happened if that same missile would have gone into the church in the 50s. So in the context of, killing Jews, killing Israelis, the same Jewish Zionism, I get it. But deliberately targeting a mixed city, heavily populated by Christians, heavily, obviously, populated by Palestinians, is something that, on the face of it, I don't understand. But if you think about it deeply, here's what it means to tell you. But before I get into what it means, save the punchline for the end, I want to talk about the ceasefire. Everybody knows what the ceasefire is, so yes, yes. So if you don't know, just bring it up to date. 9 p.m. Israel time, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a ceasefire was agreed upon between Hamas and Israel under the auspices of the Secretary of State Clinton and under the new Egyptian government. So I could be the bearer of good news and tell you, hey, there's a ceasefire. And then I could actually be honest with you and tell you that since the moment the ceasefire was signed until just now, I've been talking to all kinds of people who are knowledgeable and thoughtful, intelligent people. And I regret to say this, I have no idea what the ceasefire means. And here's why I'm clear as to what the ceasefire means. Because at the end of the day, for better or for worse, I'm a lawyer, so I actually read things. I'm sure all you law students are reading, so yes, yes. And if you're not, don't raise your hand. I take you back to Operation Cast Lead in December of 2008. Everybody remembers Operation Cast Lead? So Operation Cast Lead was initiated by the government of Israel, obviously controversial, as a result of, depends who you want to believe, 10, 12, 14,000 Qassam missiles that had been fired into Israel for the moment of the idea of disengaging from Gaza in August of 2005. And because history is important, history is important. Always born. I take you back to August 2005. In August of 2005, the government of Israel and Prime Minister Sharon disengaged from the Gaza Strip. Controversial, yes. Did I think it was correct? Absolutely. On public records, having said that disengagement from Gaza was absolutely the right thing to do. As one of the more controversial aspects of the disengagement, after a long discussion, the government of Israel decided to leave all the greenhouses in Gush Katif for the Palestinians. If any of you have ever been to Gaza, it's not a trick question. No? So you need to know that the primary source of economic support in Gaza then was agriculture. And the overwhelming majority of Gazans who were employed in the agricultural economy of Gaza worked in Gush Katif, and the greenhouses were employed by Jewish settlers in Gaza. Sharon leaves the greenhouses. It's a source of extraordinary economic importance for the Gazans. So the first thing that Hamas does after the IDF disengages in August 2005 is destroys all the greenhouses. Brutally, viciously. They destroyed them for two reasons. One might not make sense to you, and the second absolutely makes sense. One that absolutely makes sense is that the greenhouses were the vestiges, if you will, of the occupation from 1967 to 2005. So I get destroying symbols. I get it. But here's the real reason they did it. By destroying the greenhouses, they ensured a spike like this, not like this, but like this, in unemployment amongst young males in the Gaza Strip. Unemployment not like this, shot straight up. Why'd they do it? Because when young 20 males in their 20s have nowhere to go, where do they go? They are easily recruitable, lured into becoming, magical word, suicide bombers. Hamas's decision in August 2005, which was terrifically underreported, maybe not by the Canadians, but clearly by the American media, created this huge bulk of available, willing, ready suicide bombers. And not only suicide bombers, but also young men who are ready, willing, and able to become rocket launchers. And that is why from August 2005 until December 2008, again, we can already put the numbers until tomorrow morning, between 10 to 14,000 Qassam missiles were fired into Israel. Those 10 to 14,000 Qassam missiles had a range, in terms of a concentric circle, of 40 kilometers. That's how far the Qassam missile could go. And then they were enhanced to something called the Guard missile. Range 40 kilometers, meaning that 750,000 Israelis lived in harm's way from day A to day B. All right, Operation Cast Lead begins, and I remind all of us that Operation Cast Lead ended in January 2009, a day or two before the inauguration of President Obama. The reason that Olmert ended Operation Cast Lead before the inauguration was to give Obama a clean slate in terms of the Middle East. We can have a long discussion as to what has Obama done with that clean slate, but that's for another day. So two things happened between January 2009 and last week. One is obviously Gilad Shalit, but with all due respect to Gilad Shalit, it's not totally relevant to this conversation, again, with all due respect to Gilad Shalit. Two things happened. One, Israel created this terrific life-saving thing called the Iron Dome. Without Iron Dome, without Iron Dome, I don't know how many Israelis have been killed this past week. Iron Dome is somewhere 90, 92% effective it is in Gaza. Except for those idiots who went out to watch the damn thing work, and one of them only got killed because he wanted to watch the best game in town. He's seriously ill. But here's what Hamas did. Hamas used the past January 2009 until last week, absolutely, totally, and thoroughly to its operational advantage. Because what Hamas did with the assistance of Iran, with the assistance of Sudan, not sure exactly with what degree of willing assistance of Egypt, and they wholly, totally, and thoroughly rearmed themselves. But not only did they rearm themselves in terms of Qassam missiles, which had the 40-mile radius, but they enhanced their operational capability significantly. They literally doubled it. Because the new missile, the Fajar, has a radius of 75 kilometers. So in the past, Tel Aviv had been, unbombable operationally. Jerusalem had been unbombable, there's such a word in English, operationally. Today, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem are indeed, as we all know, so yes, we all know, are indeed within the range of 75 kilometers. But how did this happen, and why is this important to this conversation? Because know what I just told you, which is why I asked some of you to study international law. The conflict between Hamas and Israel, which is a very region-specific conflict, has 3, maybe 4 additional players that have a direct involvement. And you must be sensitive to this because it just heightens and exacerbates the extraordinary complexity. Note the trail. Iran, yes, the Sudan, where the missiles are made. And some of you may have noticed, it was either last month or 2 months ago, a bomb-making factory in Sudan went up in smoke, and that's a good thing. Whoever did it, good for them. I assume it wasn't the government of Canada. 3, Egypt. Now, note the following. And the final bit is the following. So 4 pieces. The missiles come into Gaza from northern Sinai through extraordinarily elaborate tunnels. In the mid-90s, I spent a day with the guy whose profession is a tunnel detector. That's what he does. He's a professional tunnel detector. And I don't remember his name. The tunnel detector Mufaz, who at the time was the subsequently becoming the Secretary of Minister of Defense at the time, was the head of the Southern Command. And I spent a day looking for tunnels. In the summer, and this poor guy, whatever his name is, was schlepping, you know, I don't know, 20 kilos or 30 kilos of tunnel detecting equipment. Profusely drenched in sweat, because, I mean, this is hot, nobody's helping him, but he's the tunnel detector guy. And we're walking and walking and walking. We can have a long conversation how stupid was it to walk like that in Gaza. Of course it was stupid, but that's okay. And he says to Mufaz the following, he says, I know that we are standing on a tunnel. I know this. I just have no idea what that goddamn thing is. And why is that important? Because it tells you the extraordinary sophistication of the tunnel system. Those tunnels are so sophisticated that I know from a friend of mine who's actually been in one of them, that they have a very elaborate field hospital. These tunnels have been created by hand. People digging. Some of them end up in people's living rooms. And those tunnels are, yes, used to bring people in, bring people out. Drugs, yes. Drugs, no. I assume also, without knowing this for sure, but I also assume, women's sex smuggling. Sex, I'm sure, I know that. But for our purposes, here's what they're really used for. This is how missiles are brought in: Iran, Sudan, Egypt, Northern Sinai, boom, into Gaza. So while we were developing the Iron Dome, they were doubling their operational capability. Now, how do you go about developing an operation capability like Hamas has done, and give credit where credit is due? They get credit on this. Absolutely get credit on this. The person who was responsible for this very elaborate, very sophisticated, and very dedicated and devoted effort was the guy who last Wednesday was driving his car with his son, and his car vaporized. So he's also, in addition to being responsible for this enormous missile infrastructure development, he's also the one you will recall who kidnapped the election. But he was not killed because of the election. He was killed because he was the chief of staff of the army of Hamas. Using an army like this because obviously a non-state can't have it. So kudos to this guy for creating this. Full stop. Digression, because digressions are important. I need to explain to some of you maybe who aren't up to date on what this targeted killing. Everybody knows what targeted killing is. Say yes, yes. But I need to explain to you how it's done because I was involved. And it's important to this conversation. Targeted killing works in the following way. And we could also have a long discussion about its morality, and effectively, first I want to explain how it works. You receive an enormous amount of intelligence information, and the job of the analyzers is to determine whether or not that information is reliable, credible, viable, time relevant, and whether it's corroborated. The amount of time in which you have to make these decisions is really short. According to experts, the window of opportunity with respect to this bill last Wednesday, take a deep breath, 20 seconds. So the first thing you have to do is you have to gather intelligence, then you have to analyze. 2, you have to ask yourself 4 critical international law questions. 1, are there alternatives? Are there alternatives to killing this particular individual? 2, in the context of proportionality, does he pose a significant enough threat that it's worth, quote unquote, worth it, legitimate, correct? 3, what's going to happen with in the context of collateral damage? For those of you who are not lawyers, collateral damage is a fancy term for killing innocent people. And 4, military necessity. How necessary is it to kill? Intelligence, international law. Next step is something called morale. I stand before you. I will propose the following reasons, with no disrespect intended to anybody. There is no other army. I say this humbly but very seriously. There is no other army that imposes on its soldiers the following requirement. And note this very carefully. With all the criticism of the IDF, some of it deserved, some of it not. Full stop, parentheses. I speak to you as the father of a child who served in the elite reconnaissance unit. So I know what I speak, and I also served in the IDF for 19 years. The IDF imposes on its soldiers, wait, before I get there, how many of you have ever fired a gun in your life? Okay. None of you bought the damn thing here. How many of you have ever served in the military? Oh, cool. Well, right. You have. All right. So those of you who have served in the military, have you ever done nighttime shooting and daytime shooting? You have. I can see your vote. You'll agree with me. Say, even if you disagree, agree with me that nighttime shooting is totally different from daytime shooting. Thank you very much. Okay. We have not met before. Okay. With all the complexity of this paradigm, we impose on the soldier, the 19-year-old alpha male, correct? The obligation to wait an additional second before firing your gun. Those of you who have not been in combat and have not been in harm's way, nor have you, those of you who have not put somebody else's child in harm's way, by the way, parentheses, there's nothing scarier than putting somebody else's child in harm's way. It's a responsibility that is awesome. I mean, awesome, you know, it's wrong. So we impose on soldiers this responsibility to wait an additional second. That additional second is the difference between life and death. But what we tell the soldiers, if you are not convinced, then you wait. Parentheses within parentheses within parentheses, so it's the only way to make this work. In my last job, which you mentioned, I was a commander of the IDF School of Military Law. We created the world's first interactive video teaching soldiers how to conduct themselves morally in armed conflict. We asked ourselves, how do we respond to the endless complaints against the idea of various human rights organizations, human rights first, human rights last, human rights in the government, other favorite human rights, against human rights. We decided the only way to do this was to create an interactive video teaching at level 1 per county. This is very creative using Hollywood movies. It's pretty cool stuff. And then I, as the commander, took it upon myself to go show the video to thousands of soldiers. But the most important meeting that I ever had with soldiers and the commander is the following. The commander, his name is Guy. His last name's not important. The unit is a paratroop battalion. They are located outside Nablus, and a battalion is a big old thing. Those of you who have not been in the military, a lieutenant colonel, battalion commander is 8 levels above God. God is not even his driver. Guy told in my presence the following story. He had been given an order with his battalion to go into Nablus to go get 2 or 3 bad guys. So off they went. As they were approaching Nablus, his spotter, his intel guy, looked into the binoculars and saw that the village square was filled with kids. 10 o'clock Monday morning. So Guy, as a good Israeli, the first thing he did, of course, is he yelled at his intel guy and said, how is it that there are kids in the village square? Isn't it today a holiday? Because it wasn't a holiday, there's no Palestinian Remembrance Day. How is it, First, what had happened is the battalions were walking in mid-morning, right? The bad guys went to school principals and said, school's up. And school principals had no choice, and what they told the kids is, school's up. And when kids are told school's out, don't tell me you go home and do homework. Maybe that's what you tell your parents, but that's bullshit. What you do is you go play. So they milled about the village square. They became, at that moment, human shields. And there's one thing that I suggest you take away from this conversation. It is this nefarious, vile practice of, you bless you, of using children as human shields. So Guy is now faced with a dilemma. Because he, by the way, he sees the bad guys. He sees them. I asked him, what'd you do, right? He said, well, you know, I can play this cat and mouse, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, Option number 2, boom, go into town, you know, what happens, happens, face the rest are off. Option number 3, U-turn, you know, call it a day and come back another day. But you must note, as he's going through this dilemma, running through these options in his own mind, ABC, people are coming out because this is now the best show in town. Because 10 o'clock Monday morning, there's not a whole lot to do. There's not a whole lot to do in Nablus other than watching IDF unit standing there in the middle of a goddamn, it's not a freeway, it's a 2-lane road, very internet. Guy uses, and I hate the term in English, it doesn't work, and I apologize for it. Called mission abortion. It's got to be better term in English. I don't know what it is called. Turn around. U-turn. Think about that person. Now, I don't know if any of you can imagine what it is to U-turn. If battalion, you'll agree with me, it's not like returning a small bolts off the line. It's pretty simple. I asked him the following questions. I said, how'd your commanders respond? By the way, he consulted nobody. His call. Commanders gave him thumbs up. I said, how did your peer group respond? You know, all the other lieutenant colonels want to be colonel? He said, they all agreed with me, and then he adds it's a good Israeli, and those who did agree with me are idiots anyway. Okay? And I said, most importantly of all, how did your 19-year-old alpha males respond? He said 50% thumbs up, 50% called me a wimp. I said, and what do you do with that? He said, watch. This is all in their presence, and you can't make this stuff up. It's an extraordinary conversation. So, and he's telling me the story in front of them. And then he says to them, boom, after we watched the video teaching moral code, he says that here's the order of the day. You know, I have to understand, order of the day from a battalion commander, higher than high. With all due respect to those of you who are believers. He said, if you are not sure of the person standing opposite you poses a threat or not, you will wait, quote, an extra second. They screamed at him. You know, you signed our death sentence, who are you? You know, typical Israeli, you know, kumbaya culture, right? And he let them yell and yell, he cut them off, he said, order of the day. And they yelled and yelled and yelled. He said, you can keep yelling until tomorrow morning, but this is the way it's going to be. Why is that? By the way, order of the day is order of the day. Right? It is what it is. Why is that important in the context of this conversation? Because when we think about the targeted killing paradigm that I was involved in, which takes us back to Wednesday, I told you there's the 4 legal questions. I told you that there's the 4-part intelligence test. There is absolute responsibility to conduct this nasty business morally. There's a long discussion, really long discussion amongst people like me as to whether or not you can teach morality. Long discussion. Philosophers say this, and soldiers say that, and people say, oh. But at the end of the day, in the military, we don't vote. There's a committee of one. I was the committee. And I voted, yes, you can teach morality. Proactively. Even at the risk of endangering soldiers, and I here want to confess to you the following story. This all ties in. Those of you who have been to Israel know that there are checkpoints throughout the West Bank say yes, yes. There's a checkpoint between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, and at that checkpoint the following occurred. One of the things that we taught soldiers is the absolute, underline, absolute requirement to respect the religious artifacts of Palestinians. Absolute obligation. To this checkpoint arrives a Palestinian with a prayer rug, you know, like curled up. Soldiers who were from the Nachal Brigade, I personally trained. They respected, they remembered what I had told them about respecting, you know, Palestinian art. And so they did not ask him to unfurl the prayer rug. By the time they realized what was going to happen, they were both dead. Because inside that prayer rug was an AK-47. I've been asked, confession, I've been asked on innumerable occasions whether or not I hold myself personally responsible for their deaths. I have also been asked, did I go to the Shiva of the 2 of them? The Jewish mourning period. And I thought about it long and hard, should I go? I came to the conclusion that I'm certainly open to criticism in this one, and maybe I was wrong. I decided at the end of the day not to go, because I felt it would be too difficult to explain to the parents who I was and why I was there and so on. So I didn't. If I did it correctly or incorrectly, I'm certainly open to criticism. And the 5th aspect, full circle, 5th aspect of the targeted killing paradigm is this effectiveness. And here we must break effectiveness down into 2 parts. There's short-term tactical effectiveness, and there's long-term strategic effectiveness. I went from birth to law school? Jesus, okay. So Professor Ed Taplin, who teaches operations research at Yale, makes the following argument. That targeted killing, at the end of the day, is ineffective. Makes the argument for the following reason. And it's important to note. Because even if we prevent a specific act of terrorism on, what's today, Wednesday? On Wednesday. Then empirically, you can show that the result of that specific counterterrorism measure will be down the road a retaliatory act by that individual's group. So then we need to really ask ourselves, short-term versus long-term effectiveness, how do we decide when to act and when not? So with all that out of the way, let's go back to last Wednesday. So I would argue, have argued, have been interviewed on this, and will continue to argue, that I fully understand why this guy was killed last Wednesday. Because if he indeed was responsible for a significant uptick in Hamas operational capability from January 2009 to last Wednesday, he absolutely meets my test of what is called a direct participant in terrorism. He's not a passive guy, he's absolutely a direct participant. There's no doubt about it. By the way, he would have been the first one to tell you he was a direct participant. And in a direct participant, then the additional two questions we have to ask ourselves. One, is he a legitimate target? And when is legitimate target a legitimate target? Was he a legitimate target? The answer is yes. No doubt about it. Was he a legitimate target when he was killed? Here's where it gets complicated. It's not complicated enough yet? Now it gets complicated. To make a bomb, to make a missile, or to make a suicide bombing operation happen, like today wasn't suicide, right? Everybody knows about the bus today. There are at least 4, if not 5, distinct actors who are essential to making either the bomb making or the suicide bombing attack occur. Note the following. Let's begin with the suicide bombing. So before we begin with the suicide bombing, I need to tell you that I have, over the course of the 20 years I served in the IDF, 43 years in the Gaza Strip, and as a judge and as a prosecutor, and so on, so on, so on, I have met with a significant number of suicide bombers. Obviously, I met with failed suicide bombers, and it's really tough to 4 actors, if not 5, who make a suicide bombing occur. Note the following. 1, guy who does this, he or she, right? By the way, there's never been a targeted killing of a woman. No. All the people that have been hit and targeted killing are men. So this person, and by the way, there have been women who've done horrific suicide bombings. Note that also. So this person does this. That's actor number 1. Actor number 2 is the person responsible for logistics, the person who makes the belt, who drives the bomber to the place and so on. Actor number 3 is the quarterback of the team, the one who's responsible for it. Actor number 4 is the financier of terrorism. There is no terrorism without finance. And actor number 5, maybe, is somebody who's called, the enhancer, the person who creates some kind of a religious paradigm or a motivation paradigm. I don't know. I'm not sure about it. So those are the 4, if not 5, actors responsible for a suicide bombing. Those are legitimate targets. When are you a legitimate target? A suicide bomber, when he stands outside the door about to walk into this place, is he or she a legitimate target for target killing? The answer is absolutely yes. Without a doubt. Are they a legitimate target when they're sleeping in bed the previous night? The answer is absolutely not. Note the following. Of all the suicide bombers I know of, or people who have been involved in suicide bombing like attacks, I know of 1. If you want to correct me, if you know of others, let me know. I know of 1 who claimed that he woke up that morning and had a dream to do a suicide bomb. Because the process takes too long to radicalize them. The process is too long to prepare them. So people don't wake up in the morning and say, I had a dream, today's the day. But while he wakes up in the morning, is he good to go? Not yet. He becomes a legitimate target in terms of operationally when he's about to walk into this room, not before. And if you act before that, from my perspective, you act immoral. And I cannot emphasize to you enough this twin road of legality and morality. What about a guy who's our logistics guy? So our logistics guy, in many ways, is far more important than our bomber. Because a bomber goes, bomber comes. The logistics guy, he's a repeat guy. He drives suicide bomber after suicide bomber after suicide bomber. Is he a legitimate target when he's driving the suicide bomber? The answer is yes. Is he a legitimate bomber when he's in bed the previous night? I don't think so. Is he a legitimate driver when he's making the suicide belt? You betcha. Because he's then a direct participant, without any doubt about it. What about the quarterback of the team? The one who drafts, recruits, the one who creates the paradigm, the one who does everything. Quarterback, those of you who know anything about football, or you know about football. The quarterback of the team is the As part of the Michigan hand, I know you have never been to a game. That's terrible. Okay. The quarterback of the team is the quarterback of the team is the quarterback of the team. He is a legitimate target 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. No ands, no ifs, no buts. The financier, those of you in law school, you want to write a law review note addressing a cutting-edge issue that none of us know the answer to, that is low-hanging fruit for law students. address the question of whether a financier of terrorism is a legitimate target for counterterrorism, and if yes, when. It is an issue that none of us have an answer to. So I put this as a challenge to law students. Go write a note of this. All of us would be happy to read it because we don't have an answer. And the fifth person, this enhancer, I don't know enough about him. That's also maybe a great note. So the only way targeted killing can be lawful is if you break down carefully and narrowly the specific acts. Go back to my international law test, those 4 parts, especially the collateral damage. We'll come back. What about to make a bomb? So making a bomb is complicated. 4 distinct actors. Actor number 1 are the guys who run around here with the rocket launchers, boom, and they fire it off. Okay. So when he's shooting the rocket, is he a legitimate target? Yes. In the context of self-defense, when he's doing this with the rocket launcher, can he be killed? You betcha. Should he be killed? You betcha. Without a doubt. Second person, more complicated. The guy whose land is being used for the rocket launcher. Here's where it gets dicey. Rocket launchers are, you run around with them, you stick them in the ground, you fly. So if our property owner has no choice, because his hand has been, put behind his back by the bad guys, he is not a legitimate target. But if he's a member of Hamas and willingly giving his land, is he a legitimate target? Perhaps. That also is a great law review. What about our bomb maker? The guy, chief of factory. Is he a legitimate target? He's akin to the quarterback of the team. Because without him, we don't have how many God knows tens of thousands of missiles that can be fired in Europe. So he's akin to the quarterback. What about the brains behind it, the guy who does the science of the bomb? He too is a legitimate target when engaged. What does all that then mean in the context of last Wednesday, this past week, and moving forward? So, to move it all forward, last Wednesday's guy who was killed, without a doubt, if you believe in the state's right to engage in self-defense, he was a legitimate target. Some will ask, what about the fact that his kid was in the car with him? One of the tragic realities, and note this very carefully, our guy last Wednesday knew that he was on a list, because they know there are lists. If he was really interested in his child's welfare, I propose that he probably wouldn't put his kid in his car. Note, and I repeat deliberately, the human shielding by bad guys of children is a vile thing, because they are willingly endangering their own children. And the importance of that cannot be minimized. Is it horrible that his child died? Of course it's terrible that his child died. Terrible. But in the context of effectiveness, it's a long discussion. It is a painful discussion. So let me tell you something. I can assure you that those who made the decision to kill him lose sleep over losing his child in a way that I bet you that he never considered. Because if you human shield your child, you, A, are not considering the loss of your own child's life, nor are you losing sleep over the loss of somebody else's child. Note, by the way, the quarterbacks of the suicide bombing operation, they don't send their own children to be a suicide bomber. They send other people's children to be a suicide bomber. You need to put that out there. For the past 8 days, we've had Operation, what is it called in English? Operation Gates of Heaven? Pillars of Defense. Pillars of Defense? I never understood how these names come up. Okay, Pillars of Defense. What happened here over 8 days? It is cycle number 866. The IDF comes in with the air attacks, seeks to hit who they hit. Hamas fires the missiles. Israel hits back. Hamas hits back. It was clear at some point, in spite of the call-up of 75,000, which turns out not to be 75,000, but 56,000 reserve soldiers. It became pretty clear right quick that there was not going to be a ground incursion here. I think it's pretty clear that Netanyahu played what they call hold me back. And so Secretary of State Clinton comes in from where she'd been with Obama in Burma, right? Cambodia, Burma, wherever she was, Myanmar, right? So she lands in a plane, the thing that we have airport in Tel Aviv, and she lands, and then along with the Egyptians who need to, play some kind of role in this entire paradigm, we have negotiations for 2 days. Who are the actors and who are not the actors, and how do we go forward? One, we need to ask ourselves, Egypt to where? Post-Mubarak, what is the role of the new Egyptian government in the context of the Middle East is an open question. Was today for them important? I think that's clearly yes. Two, what's the role of this thing some of you may recall from the pages of history? Some of you may recall, yes, the Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority and Mohammed Abbas are unfortunately, largely relegated to the pages of history, and this is really bad. They've been relegated to the pages of history because they have in many ways, unfortunately, made themselves irrelevant, or been made irrelevant, and that is really bad. Because the Palestinian entity, the Palestinian people today, I suggest, are distinctly divided, boom, like this. There's Hamas Gaza, and there's PA West Bank. And it's clear that the disconnect between them is extraordinarily profound. I remind you that in the aftermath of Hamas's victory in 2005, 2006, after the destruction of the greenhouses, the next thing that Hamas did was they killed, tortured, and kneecapped people who were affiliated with the Palestinian Authority. When I say kneecap, I mean kneecap. There's a kneecap, killed them, tortured. The disconnect between the two is profound. Mohammed Abbas, Palestinian Authority, has as much influence in the Gaza Strip as I do, which is 0. What worries Mohammed Abbas, and it should worry, is the possible infiltration of Hamas into the West Bank, particularly southern West Bank, where Hillel. That's an open question. So while it's true that Hillary Clinton, spent time with Mohammed Abbas, and she flew to Ramallah, she spent time in Ramallah, she flew, that convoy to Ramallah. At the end of the day, one of the really bad things that's happened here in the past X period is the increasing minimization of the importance of the Palestinian Authority. That's not good for anybody. 3, obviously the government of the United States. Obama, Clinton put the full weight of the U.S. behind this and said this needs to happen. So what happened today? And where are we Wednesday, almost Thursday morning in the Middle East? So if I got my timing correct, at noon in Israel, 5 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, there's the attack on the bus. And the last time I checked, there were 22, is that right, like 21 people, 21, 22? Nobody's killed. There's one person critically injured, 2 or 3 moderately, and the rest light. Okay. Now there's a ceasefire. Well, let's ask ourselves, what is a ceasefire and what does it mean going forward? 1, ceasefire. Okay. Which went into effect 9 p.m. Israel time. The last time, thanks to your computer, as of an hour ago, 13 missiles, as of an hour ago, 13 missiles have been fired into Israel after the ceasefire. So I asked myself, right, simple question. If you're going to sign the goddamn ceasefire, are you going to mean it or are you going to dick around? I put that out there bluntly, coldly, and honestly. Because the question now becomes, and we're going to see in the next couple of hours, you can go online and see if there are more fired. This is as up to date as you can be, right? Unless you're checking the Michigan score. But the question is this ceasefire for real? What's that? Okay. Is this ceasefire for real? And if the ceasefire is broken, what's going to happen? In the context of what's going to happen exactly means what is going to happen. Now, because everybody likes to ask the question, who are the winners and who are the losers, right? I don't think there's any doubt that the winners are the following. The winner is Hamas. And here's why Hamas won. 1, because they showed enhanced operational capability. 2, they can come to the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and say the following. Connect the dots. 8 days bombing, attacking an Israeli bus, government of Israel agrees to a ceasefire. You can go A to B to C. I can clearly see why tonight in Gaza Strip there were wild celebrations. By the way, I love the wild celebrations that they fire guns. Never understood. Never understood. From the perspective of Israel, what does this mean? I think if you were to ask, a typical Israeli like me, who's been around the block, over and over again in this question. Whether or not the ceasefire holds, doesn't hold. It's only a matter of time before we go to the next round. That, in many ways, is the true tragedy. The next round will be another year, 2 years, 3 years, who the hell knows? And here is why we are stuck. Unfortunately, it's not a happy conversation. I don't know if it's been happy so far, or now it gets really unhappy. We're stuck for the following reasons. If you're bored tonight, or if you're bored now, go online and read the Hamas covenant. Hamas has had opportunity and been requested over and over again to change the covenant and to delete, these criticisms that talk about the destruction of the state of Israel. So I told you earlier that I negotiated a elimination of Oslo. That's a viable and important contribution to the conversation.
164 Palestinians have been killed. Ahmad al-Jabri, 52 years old. Muhammad al-Hams, 28 years old. Ridal Arafat, 4 years old. Omar al-Nasr, 11 months, years old. 20 years old. Muhammad al-Qasir, 20 years old. Haba al-Mashrawi, 6 months pregnant, 19 years old. Mahmoud al-Salahi, 65 years old. Habib Hassan, 29 years old. Wael Hadir al-Ghaffaz, 31 years old. Hisham Muhammad al-Ghazan, 31 years old. Rami Hamid, 29 years old.
Hey, you're ugly, sit down.
Say that, bro. Get up. Come outside and say that. Hey, better be sitting down.
Walid Abdi, 2 years old. Amin Tafish, 10 months old. Uday Jamil Nasser, 16 years old. Firas al-Bayuni, 11 years old. Mohammed Sa'idallah, 4 years old. Ayman al-Warda, 22 years old. Kabir Suleiman, 20 years old. Ismail Kandel, 24 years old. These people are not here.
It's a half-time show. I have to say, there's nobody who's a believer of free speech as much as I am, but if you want to have a discussion, have a discussion. It's not the way to have a discussion. So how do we go forward?
Stop killing innocent people.
I'm happy to answer questions. If you want to ask questions, you want to follow.
Take me out. Take me out. Chill. Come, let's go. Come, buddy. Take me down. Let's go. Let's go, buddy. Come on, everyone outside. Let's go. Hey, better be sitting down.
Sir?
Let's go. Is that all you're good at? Is that all you're good at? Come outside.
What's going to happen when we go outside?
Come, I'll show you. Come, let's go. I'll show you. Let's go.
That's a
I'll show you what's good, bro.
What's good?
All right, back to the case. Where were we? So the question is, how do we proceed here now? And the questions are the following. Will the government of Israel and Hamas at some point enter into negotiations, like Israel and the Palestinians Hillel at the end of the age? Or is this a permanently unresolvable conflict? And I think That is the single most important question of the day. I take you back 20 years. 1993. If you would have asked the Israeli public, I think in the early 90s, there was, I think, probably more than 50% said at some point we're going to have to negotiate with the Palestinians. But note then the Palestinians weren't divided the way they are today. And then when Oslo begins, Oslo begins. And I'm proud to say that for the third time, as somebody who was directly involved in its implementation, I viewed it as an extraordinary privilege and pleasure to be involved. I also raise my hand and confess, I truly believe that our Prof was committed to the peace process. I stand before you and say that I was wrong. Did Israel make mistakes along the way? Of course, obviously. But was Arafat committed to it? No. And then the whole thing, explodes or evaporates, implodes. And then happens to the Palestinian people what happens in terms of Hamas and Gaza. So here we are asking ourselves as Israelis, do we negotiate with a group defined by the U.S. government as a terrorist organization, actually committed to the destruction of the state of Israel? So I take you back to the great movie The Godfather, right? You keep your friends close and your enemies closer. This is the question. And it is a question without an easy answer. Because on the one hand, it's clear that Hamas is Hamas and Hamas ain't going anywhere. The question is, will Hamas take over increasingly the West Bank? What's the tone and tenor of Hamas's relationship with the new Egypt, Islamic Brotherhood government? What's the relationship between Hamas and Iran? What's the relationship between Iran and Egypt? What's the future of Syria? I mean, everybody knows that there's no regime more barbaric than the Syrian regime. By the way, I assume you all saw what the BBC reporter did. Everybody see this? If you haven't seen it, you got this. It's priceless. You can't make this shit up. The BBC reporter took pictures from Syria of the absolute barbaric murder of Syrian babies, and removed, Syria from the headline and put Gaza. It's been called out now. There are all kinds of calls for the BBC to fire him, which absolutely should happen. So the future of Syria plays into this conversation also, because if the Assad government falls, who will take over Syria? So if you take all the geopolitics of this, it's extraordinarily confusing. But I want to make a point about Hamas. Hamas has made consistent efforts, and from their perspective, understandably so, that, for instance, Al-Qaeda was just trying to come in the past into Gaza, and they wouldn't let Al-Qaeda in. Hezbollah has tried to come into Gaza, and they told Hezbollah in Al-Haway. Because they see this as a local, region-specific issue. The final point I want to make, before I turn it over for questions, is this thing called Northern Sinai. I take you all back to 2011 and the terrorist attack that began when a group of terrorists from Hamas went out from Gaza, went all the way through Northern Sinai, and came back into southern Israel. That terrorist attack, first of all, conduced to Hamas for an extraordinarily sophisticated terrorist attack. Took months to prepare for it. I mean, really could do. It was scary as hell. Because they understood, maybe, I think, frankly, faster than we did in Israel, that Northern Sinai is an absolute no man's land, and it's their right for the state. And they are clearly using it to their advantage. That is a huge problem. They can use it as a staging area. What's the role of the Egyptian government? What's the willingness of the Egyptian government? What's the resolve of the Egyptian government to prevent Northern Sinai from becoming a staging area for terrorist attacks into southern Israel? Your guess is as good as mine. So, final thoughts. Wednesday evening, 2 hours after the ceasefire, I wrote to somebody tonight, the situation is far less clear than it is clear. I come from the school of thought, if you haven't figured this out yet, I come from the school of thought that says, bullshit's not allowed. So I really don't know. But I would suggest the following. One, the clear desire of the American administration is to be done with the Middle East, whatever that is. If Obama has his way, he'll spend the next 4 years in terms of foreign affairs dealing only with Asia. That's clearly his desire. It's not by chance that, and he clearly signaled that. I mean, the first trip in post-elections to go through Myanmar, Cambodia, and North Korea. So that's obvious. But they can't help themselves because the Middle East, at the end of the day, is the absolute tipping point. So yes, the administration would like to be involved, but not like to be involved, but they have no choice. Two, is there any chance for a peace process? Who knows? Three, Mohammed Abbas isn't going to live forever. He's even older than I am. And the question is, who comes after him? So the plan all along has been that Marwan Barghouti would replace him, but Marwan Barghouti is stuck in the bed and breakfast called jail. And I don't see an Israeli government releasing him. So who comes after Mohammed Abbas in the West Bank? Who the hell knows? 4, 5, will there be elections in the Gaza Strip? So if I'm a Gaza. And even if I voted Hamas, back then, I would have to ask myself, is this what I voted for? Daily tax in Israel, daily tax from Israel. My life, I would imagine to be a Gazan living in Gaza today can't be a happy story. It can't be like living in London, Ontario. And I think they have to take a long, hard look and ask themselves, what did we get really voted for from us? And 5 and 6, where's the international community in all this? That's also an unknown. So at the end of the day, we are clearly, and frankly speaking, faced with far more unknowns than knowns. Both sides here have suffered heavily. I told you that the bombing in Tel Aviv and so on, and southern Israel, the economic damage in the past week in Israel is on an astronomical number. There's no doubt that Gaza has suffered here. But at the end of the day, I looked at somebody this morning at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when I start my day, unfortunately. I said, this is lose-lose. And somebody who was really thoughtful wrote me back, telling me that I'm wrong. And I'll finish with this. They were very thoughtful to me. Said that I'm wrong. I asked him, here's why he thinks I'm wrong. He says, absolutely this is a lose from Israel's perspective. But he says, it's a win from Hamas's perspective, because they are able to come to the Gaza people and say, we did such and such, and at the end of the day, Israel was forced into the ceasefire, and we now have the opportunity. I don't know if that's correct, but I put that out there as food for thought. On that happy or unhappy note, that'll leave up to you. I understand we have time for questions unless I put you all to sleep. If I didn't put you all to sleep, then I'd be happy to answer any questions. But civil discourse, the rules are not what we have to be able to do. It's not civil discourse. The microphone for a gazillion times, right? So yeah, I mean, there are X percent of reporters who probably were agenda-driven. But I also think that, especially in 1,000 picture, one picture tells 1,000 words. And I'll give you an example. Mohammed Guiora, so it's irrelevant whether or not Mohammed Guiora ever existed, and it's irrelevant who actually lived Mohammed Guiora. It's absolutely irrelevant. That picture of a 4-year-old or 6-year-old boy dying, did it really ever happen? I mean, I don't know, right? But I remember watching it live on TV with my wife. A 6-year-old child dying in his father's arms is a picture that can never be overcome. Regardless, and I know that the Scottish pathologist said this and the French pathologist said that. I've never had a different sort of irrelevant. You cannot overcome the picture of a 6-year-old boy dying in his father's arms. You cannot overcome graphic pictures of little babies dying. There's nothing you can explain that will overcome. I think it's an open secret, don't repeat this, that not every spokesman that Israel sends in front of cameras is remarkably effective. But don't repeat it. I found, as an obviously observer of this, but a participant, that on X number of occasions, the Palestinian spokesmen are far more effective than Israeli spokesmen. But their story, in many ways, is an easier story to tell. Like, explaining an occupation is hard. Playing the underdog is easy. I don't, again, we would disagree. I don't buy into this inherent anti-Semitism. I don't buy into inherent anti-Israelism. It's not in my DNA. I don't believe in that. But I don't think there's any doubt that it's not even the media war anymore. It's not a social media war, right? It's a damn thing called Twitter. What's up? What's down? I don't know how serious the Israelis are with this. It has become an absolutely essential aspect of this conflict. I think it's easier to tell the story from the perspective of the attack rather than from the perspective of the attacker. To explain operational counterterrorism, there is no 20-second soundbite. There are clearly 20-second soundbites in the context of being attacked. Mohammed Guiora. That said, it's unbelievably important. I'll tell you a stupid story. Okay, a stupid story. In one of my positions, not important which ones I don't have to budget, I was asked to spend a week with a human rights organization to explain operational counterterrorism and balancing and civil rights. It's a really good thing. So at the end of the week, in the last meeting with this organization and its representatives and myself and some other people, totally by chance, I looked into this guy's briefcase, not because I'm the type of person who looks into other people's briefcases, and I saw that he had a report, and I said, like, innocent, totally innocent. I said, I see you have a report. He says, oh yeah, shit, yeah, we wrote the report before we even came. Is that fair reporting? I said, like, and this was a highly respectable group of human rights activists who came to the report at this was comic and was bank, and they wrote the report before they even came. I said to the guy, I really think you should be ashamed, and we took this so seriously that I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, but at the end of the day, it wasn't published with the line complicated at all. But is that nefarious? I mean, that's just so intellectually dishonest. Does that happen? Yeah, but you need to keep it quiet. Let's do boy, girl. How's that? All girls, all right, boys. Go ahead.
This is not a question about Israel, but I'm curious about your opinion. I'm wondering if you think the assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki's son, who was an American and a minor, was justified.
I think that's a great question. Everyone knows all about how he was, right? He's a bad guy. Al-Qawi is he was the head of Al-Qaeda Arab Peninsula. He's the one who incited Major Hassan, the one who did Fort Hood. He's the one who incited the guy who tried to do 42nd Street, 42nd and Broadway. First of all, the killing of an American by the government of America is a whole, it might be back for another hour, right? So I'm on public record as saying the killing of an American citizen in those contexts is legitimate. Whether or not it was legitimate killing him, I'm not convinced. And I'm not convinced about the killing of him, I'm certainly not convinced about the killing of this kid. Because I wasn't convinced, and having talked to a lot of people as to whether or not there was intelligence information indicative of future terrorist activity, I'm a little bit concerned that it was predicated on past. I think the Obama administration totally punted on this one in terms of not making the case for it. Please, go ahead.
Question about the informants in Gaza.
The 6 of them?
So, yeah, it's a bunch of questions. Basically, like,
one at a time, I'm not that smart.
so, do you think their motives are purely money or ideological? How many are there?
Yeah.
Were those 6 actual informants or just people that paid out?
So let's begin with the broader question about informants. Informants, people become informants primarily for 2 reasons, and then with respect to the Palestinians, is arguably been suggested further. Right, let's figure one. The other one is you get benefits. 3, you get your right, maybe there's more than 2. So 3 is you get your slate wiped clean, right? You make a deal. It's a business transaction. I've met with Palestinians who have told me the following, but again, I'm going to say this with great hesitation because I'm not sure it's true. I'm going to tell you in a second. I've been told this, but I'm not sure it's true. Okay? I've been told that a percentage of people become collaborators because they understand that Palestinian terrorism is the worst thing that can happen to the Palestinian people. And their way to combat Palestinian terrorism is to collaborate with us in order to provide information against them. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I've been told that by enough people who actually know about this, to at least put it out there as a possible problem. Numbers of collaborators, not to be rude to you, if I knew I wouldn't tell you. And the pictures of this one guy who I already saw being dragged, what can I tell you? It just defies. That said, well worth your time reading a book written by an Israeli, really thin book. His first name is Shabtai, I don't remember his last name. The Terrible Trial, Field Trial, 1946, 47. A guy named Tubianski, who was an employee of the Israel Electric Company, was suspected of being collaborating with the British. And he was judge, jury, executioner by you know, with Israel. It's not a problem in Israeli history. It's a terrible story. These things happen, but I think the pictures we all saw on YouTube, right, with the body being carried on the motorcycle again, the shooting. Yeah, I mean, it's like a stunt. By the way, maybe I'm wrong. I haven't seen any condemnation of that by Human Rights First, Human Rights Last, and my mother gets human rights, and my mother favor human rights. I see that somehow has, you know, gone under the radar, and I think that's a terrible thing. This guy was killed, murdered, and then his body being dragged to the streets of Gaza was just fine. Next, sir.
You mentioned the difficulty and uncertainty in moving forward. Do you think that there are counter-terrorism models from the past, or even counterinsurgency models from the past that Israel can or should be using?
That's a great question. Let's begin with negotiations. So I take you all back. The reason that Yasser Arafat, I think, in many ways came to Oslo is for the following reason. Take you all the way back in history. Don't forget that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians work in Kuwait. History is important. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis work in Kuwait. Hundreds of Palestinians. When Arafat supports Saddam Hussein, the first Gulf War, those hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, boom, thrown out of Kuwait. The Palestinian economy implodes totally. There's no money. That's what brought Arafat to Oslo. What brings Rabin to Oslo is his sense that the moral and social cost of the occupation was taking an enormous toll on Israeli society. They come together. In many ways, it's all about mutual self-interest. It's the only way it is. And I don't think that there's mutual self-interest with Hamas. As long as there's no mutual self-interest, there will be no negotiation. It doesn't serve their purpose. The present situation, the present paradigm serves their purpose. In terms of operational counterterrorism, you know, go back to what I told you about target killing, the word, yes, maybe yes, maybe no. Operation Cast Lead, at the end of the day, of Operation Cast Lead, you know, the punchline of Operation Cast Lead is Operation Goldstone. This time there's no Goldstone report because there's no ground report. The only word I can think of in English, if there's a better word, I would be glad to use it. We're stuck. They're stuck with us, and we're stuck with them. They're also stuck, and the Palestinian authorities also stuck with them. Ask Mohammed Abbas what to do with them, and I don't think he has a clue what to do. And I think from his perspective, the Islamic Brotherhood government in Egypt weakens him. It strengthens Hamas. Iran strengthens Hamas, weakens Abu Mazen. There's a new Syrian government, strengthens Hamas, weakens Abu Mazen. I mean, he's just getting, you know, pinched would be the word, right? Give me a better word than stuck. I'll be happy to use it, but that is where we are. And that's probably, I think, more than anything else, is what makes this so depressing.
What do you think the value of human intelligence over signal intelligence is in target killings? Are we seeing shift one to the other?
You're equal. The problem with human intelligence, that goes back to the question about sources, about collaborators. When you receive human intelligence, right, from a person, the question always is whether or not he's agenda driven. You know, something that's just somebody's sister, right? Signal intelligence is effective, provided, big caveat here, that you understand what's being said. I mean, that's cynical. I think all back to 9/11, some of you may remember 9/11. All the conversations were listened to. Because there's so much intercepting of conversations going on. The only problem was that the U.S., all those alphabet soups, DIA, DNA, CIA, FBI, they didn't have enough Arab speakers, and you didn't understand the code. So I mean, you can listen if you don't understand it. There's no point to it. You need absolute, you know, I mean, cross, like you need a cross or intersection between human intelligence and signal. The signal is a more extensive proposition of this human intelligence. Human intelligence, this is what the Israelis are really good, is human intelligence, this is the way the Americans are really bad.
Oh, you mentioned this Jabari guy.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, you were talking a bit about this Jabari guy. I think he got assassinated on Wednesday.
Wait, hang on. Sorry to be a pain in the ass, but he was not assassinated. Okay. According to no, it's really important. I'm a lawyer, sorry. The only political leaders can be assassinated. He was as much a political leader as my hair is long.
Okay, yeah.
It's not right. It's not.
I guess he has a history with Hamas.
Sorry?
He has a history with Hamas that you talked about.
He does.
I guess I was just curious, like if you had any insight onto, I think he was working on a ceasefire. Like, I don't know if that was, I just read about that.
Yeah, you're talking about the op-ed last week's New York Times. Yeah, don't know. You know, his actions in the past 4 years were not indicative of somebody charging into a ceasefire. But please,
sorry, it takes a second. I thought you brought up some really good points earlier about targeting Jerusalem, targeting Palestinian, Christians and Muslims, and sort of looking at history. And I was just wondering if you could sort of broaden that sort of view in terms of morality and also operational effectiveness to include stuff like the targeting of the flour mills or the water treatment plants in Gaza during Cast-led,
right.
the targeting of Palestinian Christians in Gaza, the targeting of Palestinian Christians in Gaza, and for example, like the massive rearmament that Israel's also undergone during this by getting money from the United States for weapons and so
forth.
forth.
First of all, I'd be happy to be educated.
It just seems a bit narrow.
Yeah, I know nothing about Palestinian Christians in Gaza. And I served in Gaza for a number of years. I know nothing about it. So I'm certainly, I don't mean it cynically. It's not cynical about me. I'm willing to be educated. I really don't know. With respect to the flour, you're talking about Operation Cast-led the flour.
Yeah, just, we're talking about morality and operational effectiveness and so
sure.
forth. It doesn't.
Absolutely. I don't know about the water treatment plant, about the flour mill. If I recall correctly, if I'm wrong, you'll correct me, right? The Goldstone report highlighted the flour mill.
And the sewage treatment plant.
Sorry?
And the sewage treatment plant.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I remember the flour mill. If I recall correctly, the Israeli response to it was that the flour mill was not necessarily a flour mill, or it had been a flour mill, was not being used as an arms depot, if I recall correctly. And that obviously poses, this balancing question in the context of a military operation. What do you do with something that has purpose A and then is being used for purpose B? I mean, the same question is that people ask about hospitals and mosques, and we can have a broader discussion. The turning a mosque into a military installation field, using it as a place to hide, combatants. So the IDF doesn't go into mosques, unlike the American military in Afghanistan, a lot much more than. What do you do with hospitals? So these are all these places have immunity according to international law. International law is very clear on civilian sites of hospitals, schools, mosques, and farmers and so on. The dilemma is, if it's being used for arms storage, if it's being used where these guys are staging their operations from. I assume, hang on a second, I'm sure you all saw on Thursday night or Friday morning, rocket launchers being fired adjacent to the CNN building in Gaza, or from the BBC or the Reuters, one of them. So this is human shielding. You tell me what to do. If a rocket launcher is standing there, and by the way, he was not shot at. We could have a long discussion as whether he should not have been shot at, even though he deliberately was placing BBC or CNN or Reuters employees in harm's way. It is. I can't give you a black white answer. I will tell you this. I told you very honest that I was involved in target killing, right? I was very honest. One of the primary questions, if not the primary question that I would ask, is exactly what you're getting at: is the collateral damage. And the collateral damage is an unpleasant reality of counterterrorism. But no, the international law doesn't say no collateral damage. International law says minimal collateral damage. Ask me what is minimal. I don't know. There have been mistakes. What was his name? Shchada. Everybody knows who Shchada is. Shchada was the guy who was killed in a target killing. All given to Israel, he said yes, yes. So when you fly in Israel, there's the 2 or 3 towers that you come to Tel Aviv. Shchada was the guy who's going to blow them up. So he's a seriously bad guy. And Shchada was killed in a targeted killing at nighttime while he's asleep in his house, which was fine. The only way the operation goes forward is if he's still alive. So he's killed. The problem was that the manner in which the target killing against him was conducted was the house implodes, and you can see this online. His 1 or 2 wives and 10 or 11 of their children are killed along with their neighbors. You ask me, absolutely justify killing him, and absolutely was not, that target killing was conducted in a way it should not have been. Even though what he was going to do would have resulted in the deaths, according to most experts, of around 20,000 people, Jews and Palestinians and tourists alike. Was there another window of opportunity that maybe should have been searched? I take you back to what I told you about international law, this whole question of alternatives. The alternatives requirement is not some passive requirement. It is a really significant aspect of operational counterterrorism. It requires you to look for another window of opportunity. Like the earlier question about our colleague's kid. With Shahada, most people will tell you that there were other windows of opportunity to kill him, justified to kill him. But killing 12 of his members of his family, I think 8 members of another family, context of collateral damage balancing, I find that one. Right.
You mentioned ceasefires and Hamas breaking ceasefires. But in the past, Israel has broken 65 UN resolutions. And that includes ceasefires, deporting Palestinians, and all that. So how do you justify calling other people terrorists and just breaking current ceasefires if Israel has constantly done that in the past? 65 UN resolutions. How do you justify those?
I'm not really sure what you're referring to, but I think the more important question, with all due respect, is that there was a ceasefire signed by Hamas this evening 3 or 4 hours ago. The question is...
Yeah, you mentioned that, but how do you justify the previous ceasefires broken by Israel?
I have no idea what you're referring to. I'd be happy to learn from you. Next question.
Definitely.
I really don't know what you're referring to.
In the context of the northern Sinai, you talked about being sort of a great place for terrorists to come in and to attack Israel. So how do you view the potential for Egypt to start militarizing Sinai, given that that would be pretty much certain that's not
Right. So first of all, in the past year, the Egyptian units have replaced the Sinai which violates Camp David with the not the tacit, but the overt agreement of Israel.
Yes.
There's a risk in that. There's clearly a risk in that. Hopefully, this new Egyptian government is going to feel the need, in the context of receiving $3 billion a year from the U.S. government, to respect Camp David moving forward. Hopefully, the Morsi understands that to be a player in this, you've got to be acting according to the agreements. But you know, it's a double-edged game. You can leave units there, and they can be passive. They can withdraw units and let terrorists come in. And I think one of the really important questions moving forward is Egypt, where I don't think there's a clear answer on that. Hopefully, the fact that they were so active here in creating the paradigm for the room for the ceasefire, maybe putting pressure on Hamas is a positive sign. But if there are already 12 missiles fired into Israel, I would certainly say the Egyptian government would be bashing Hamas. Those are the small little tests that will determine where we probably will go.
I'm wondering what role that you would see in terms of the other surrounding states in the region potentially playing a role in brokering the peace process. Because the difficulty with dealing with an organization like Hamas, which isn't exactly a state, it's been declared a terrorist organization, is that there might not be the capacity to enforce a ceasefire against them. But if, for example, the other states in the Arab League got involved and committed to assisting with such an agreement, that might have more success. So do you feel that there may not be a role for the states to assist in brokering some kind of ceasefire process?
That's a great question. When I spent those 5 years negotiating, there was a constant question as to what's the proper role of the U.S. And it's like mom and dad, At the end of the day, the only way you can have peace is the parties don't have to stick together. Everybody else has various agendas. The parties, if we go into a peace process, at the end of the day, it's going to have to be from us and Israel sitting together. I don't see the Arab League playing a role here at all. Maybe Egypt, maybe. But And you know, as soon as Egypt moves forward a little bit, then Turkey feels the need to become even more involved, and if Turkey becomes more involved, but I'm not convinced that Hamas has any interest in having a negotiated settlement. Not, hang on. Nor do I know at the moment, because the Israeli Prime Minister will be willing to. That's why I said to this gentleman's question here.
Do you think that the Palestinian people in Gaza have the ability to overthrow Hamas to facilitate some sort of self-determination activities? Because, I mean, from my perspective, I can't see how they approve of what their government is doing. Like you said, their lives are terrible.
You know, to Gazans' credit, the democratic elections in Gaza were exactly that. They were democratic. They were still a standard for elections. Seriously, I mean, very serious. Maybe not by chance they're having elections for a while. Just like they haven't been elections in PA for a while. I can't imagine, maybe I'm wrong, I can't imagine some groundswell against Hamas. I mean, these are, worried with your picture of the collaborator. These guys are in it for the long run. They are not hesitating to, you know, just don't see it. How are we doing time? How are we doing time-wise?
5 plus 7. There's ceasefires on this afternoon. You mentioned, I don't know, 15 rockets shot.
12, right?
Sorry, 12 rockets have been shot to Israel since then. I don't know if Israel's retaliated, but do you see this as an end to the current week of conflict, or do you think it's going to go on given that these rockets have been shot after the ceasefire?
Netanyahu said that they will respond. I understand what he said, but he said Israel will respond only if soldiers are in harm's way. I have no idea what that means. I mean, I really understand that. I think he's going to be under extraordinary pressure from Obama to not to respond unless something immediately moves up. Now, let's hypothetically say, God forbid, that tomorrow there's a suicide bombing in Tel Aviv and 20 people are killed. He's going to have no choice but to engage. Let's say tomorrow 10 missiles are fired and nobody dies. He won't do it. Let's say next week 10 missiles are fired and there's significant property damage. He won't respond. Let's say the following week that there's more and more rockets and more rockets. At some point he'll say, you know, there's a limit. But I don't, and the agreement does not, the agreement has at least 2 weaknesses. I mean, look at it really good. It does not talk about the smuggling of missiles into Gaza as a violation. That's a mistake. I'm sure somebody thought about it. Two, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's say take our guy was killed, Jumper. Let's say he has a replacement, we'll call him X. Let's say X is planning a terrorist attack, and let's say next Wednesday he's killed in a targeted kill. What will be Hamas's response? I mean, there's so many unbelievably complicated forks in the road here, and I don't know what Hamas will do if there's a target killing next Wednesday. I'm sure that Hamas will do it as a violation of the ceasefire. And if they fire rockets, then Israel will, you know, what will be the impact of those rockets? You know, hang on a second, knock on wood, that evidently, I'll watch it, keep in mind that we've been wrong, that the rockets they're firing do not have, what is it called in English? Sophisticated, not a sophisticated guy, as far as we know. But these guys are so smart. You need to know, Hamas, these guys are way smart. I can't imagine that they have exposed us to an entire arsenal. And no doubt. And it may well be that they have guidance missiles, like term. And all of a sudden they start targeting, like they are enhancing their guidance, accuracy. You know, that's going to be a game changer. And so, that's what I said to you months ago, far more uncertainty than certainty. 2 more questions and my voice is going to say.
I have some questions. You use the word terrorist law. And I think it's really very problematic because a lot of resistance groups have been identified as terrorist movements. So specifically in this scenario, with the disproportionate power there, how would you
terrorist as an individual, terrorism is an entity, right? Deliberately targeting innocent civilians, seeking to either kill them, injure them, cause property damage, or intimidate them from going away. The proportionality argument, we need to take, those of you who are law students, we need to take the proportionality argument and get rid of it. It's not viable in the state, non-state paradigm. Because in the state paradigm, plain state, proportionality makes sense. You know, the father of international law in the 15th century, it's not a valid question. It's intellectually not a valid question. The question is whether the state is using the weapons available to it in a manner proportionate to the threat posed. And I don't think you can use proportionality as a mirror, external mirror, it has to be viewed as an internal mirror. So then the question becomes, what are you doing with the weapons you have at your availability? So, to give you an example, it would not be hard. You know what? Let me do it this way. In 2001, 2002, whenever the second Intifada was, it became very clear that in the refugee camp in Jenin, there was a huge ammunition depot. This was the main source of weapons for Palestinians. And the dilemma in front of IDF commanders was how do you get rid of that depot? And this huge depot. The easy way to get rid of the depot would have been to send one teams and blow the damn thing up. The collateral damage would have been extraordinary. And so rather than sending in two F-16s to obliterate the damn thing, which would have been justified, what the IDF did was send in reserve brigade number 5. I don't know, either 12 or 15 of them are killed.
So do you feel that?
Wait, let me just finish.
Oh, okay.
In the context of proportionality, you can make a viable argument that they deliberately endangered their own soldiers in order to protect the other side's civilian population. That's both ways. There was great criticism of